For the best atmosphere, use headphones. I woke up in the middle of the night with an intense thirst and my mouth feeling dry. Slowly, I got up from my creaky bed and headed to the kitchen. Once there, I flipped the light switch, squinting slightly as my eyes adjusted to the brightness. I grabbed an old carafe, poured myself a glass of water and drank it quickly. I suddenly froze. Some noises caught my attention. Carefully, I set the glass down on the table and listened. From behind the wall, in the neighboring apartment, I could hear heavy, frequent breathing. I stood still for a moment, listening to the raspy, labored sounds, then shrugged it off, drank another glass of water, and went back to bed. I didn't think much of it and quickly fell asleep. The next day, I completely forgot about the strange noises from the neighboring apartment until night came again. This time, I woke up with an inexplicable sense of fear. I couldn't understand why, but I did what I had done the night before I went to the kitchen to get some water. It wasn't just to quench my thirst, but also to calm myself and clear my head. When I got to the kitchen, I heard the sounds again, the same heavy, raspy breathing from the neighboring apartment. I stood there, listening, before starting to pour myself some water. But I clumsily knocked over the glass. At that moment, I heard a rustling noise and some indistinct murmuring from the other side of the wall. I grabbed an old brush and dustpan, silently berating myself for my clumsiness, and cleaned up the shards. When I was done, I noticed that the raspy breathing had grown louder. It felt like whoever or whatever was making the noise was now pressed right against the wall. Cautiously, I moved closer and pressed my ear to the wall to try to make out what was happening in the neighboring apartment. The deep, frequent breathing was so close I thought I could almost feel it. I couldn't make out any words. I strained to listen more carefully, but just then, someone or something struck the wall with great force. Startled, I jumped back to the center of the kitchen, staring at the spot where the noise had come from. My heart was pounding, but I quickly calmed myself, reasoning that maybe my neighbor was just having trouble sleeping, and decided to mess around. Half a minute later, there was another loud thud against the wall. Hearing that, I muttered in frustration and went back to my room. Some people really have nothing better to do, I thought as I lay down. But then a troubling realization hit me. I had never actually seen the neighbor who lived in that apartment. Another dull thud echoed through the wall. Before falling asleep, I decided I needed to meet them. The next day, as I returned from work, I remembered my plan. Stopping at my door, I glanced at the door to the neighboring apartment. It was slightly ajar. Cautiously, I approached and immediately heard that same heavy, labored breathing coming from inside. A chill ran down my spine and I instinctively stepped back. At that moment, the sound was so unnerving that I had no desire to find out what or who was making it. I hurriedly stepped into my apartment and slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. Whatever my neighbor was doing, I decided to let them do it as long as they didn't involve me. That night, I woke up again, this time to loud banging on the wall. For a while, I tossed and turned in bed, listening to the noise. The banging grew louder and more persistent, but I somehow managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, as I headed to work, unease followed me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and as I passed the door to that apartment, a wave of fear swept over me. This time, the door was shut. Work offered a welcome distraction, allowing me to calm down and focus. But as evening came and I returned home, the anxiety crept back in. When I reached my floor, I nervously searched for my keys, fumbling with them as they caught on the fabric of my pocket. My hands trembled slightly, and it felt like forever before I managed to pull them out. That's when I noticed a few small scratches on my wooden front door. I don't remember seeing those before, I thought as I finally unlocked the door and stepped inside. For a brief moment, I considered asking the other tenants if they'd noticed anything strange, but fear of hearing something unsettling held me back. I reassured myself that there had to be a logical explanation for everything. When night came, I lay in bed, trying in vain to fall asleep. I racked my brain, attempting to recall who lived in the apartment next to mine, but nothing came to mind. To hell with that apartment, I muttered under my breath, but the unease didn't leave me. My thoughts circled around the oddities I'd experienced, and soon I heard a faint sound near my front door. I sat up slightly, straining to listen. The sound became clearer, a soft tapping, as if someone was gently knocking, trying not to be heard. A chill ran down my spine and goosebumps spread across my skin. For a few minutes, I just lay there frozen with fear, listening to the quiet knocks. Finally, I gathered enough courage to get up and approach the door. I moved as quietly as I could, but the creaky floor betrayed me just as I reached the door. The long, drawn-out creak beneath my feet sent a shiver through me, but instead of stopping, I pressed my face to the peephole and looked out. The hallway was empty. The hallway was empty. The knocking had stopped. I stood there for a minute, my heart pounding, before retreating to my bedroom. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I tried to make sense of what was happening. Maybe someone's trying to prank me, I thought. Or worse, maybe they're trying to scare me out of here. A memory flashed through my mind, something a friend once said about my apartment. He'd called it the best deal in the city. Not happening, I whispered to myself, determined. The next morning, I left for work feeling less afraid. I convinced myself I knew the reason behind these disturbances, which made them less intimidating. The day passed uneventfully, and by the time I went to bed that night, I was even chastising myself for being so scared. But the knocking returned. This time it was louder and more frequent. With the thought of catching the culprit red-handed, I moved toward the door again, this time avoiding the creaky spot on the floor. Despite my efforts to be silent, the peephole revealed the same thing as before, an empty hallway. As the knocking ceased once again, I wondered if the intruder had heard me approach and fled. Frustrated but too exhausted to care, I returned to bed. For the next few days, I tried not to think about it. Each night I heard the knocking again, growing louder and more aggressive with each passing day. I ignored it and forced myself to sleep. But then, one night, the knocking wasn't just loud. It was violent. It was Philip Wallace. It sounded as if someone was trying to break down the door. I bolted out of bed and ran straight to the front door, adrenaline pumping through my veins. "What's going on out there?" I shouted angrily, without opening the door. "Don't you have anything better to do? Get lost, or I'm calling the police." I tried to shake it off and went back to bed. The next morning, I woke up late, having slept through my alarm. Thankfully, I still had enough time. I rushed to get ready and sprinted to work, trying not to be late. The issues with my neighbor faded into the background, and when I returned home that evening, I wanted nothing more than to relax. That night, there were no knocks on the door. However, I was woken up by something else. Quiet scratching noises coming from the front door. Half asleep, I scanned the dark room, trying to understand what had disturbed me. Then, I heard it again. It sounded like someone lightly scratching or clawing at the door. Muttering a curse under my breath, I turned over, trying to ignore it and fall back asleep. But the sounds didn't stop. They continued, faint yet persistent, making it impossible to fully relax. The next day, I came home from work and noticed scratches on my wooden door. They were small. "This is getting ridiculous," I thought, deciding to deal with it after finishing some urgent tasks at work. That night, I woke up again, this time to louder and more aggressive scratching. The noise stopped for a moment, but soon resumed with even greater intensity. Annoyed, I got out of bed and walked to the door, standing there for a minute, debating whether to open it or not. Eventually, I decided against it and returned to bed. As I was drifting off, the scratching started again, now more grating and relentless than before. But this time I forced myself to ignore it and eventually fell asleep. The following evening I came home and froze when I saw my door. It was covered in deep, jagged scratches, especially in the middle, as if someone or something had been trying to claw their way in. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Just then, I heard faint, heavy breathing coming from the direction of that cursed apartment. I felt a piercing gaze watching me through the peephole. My hands shook as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Fear and unease consumed me. With a day off tomorrow, I decided it was time to replace the door with a sturdy metal one next week. I told myself, trying to calm my nerves. Just one more night. I locked my bedroom door tightly before going to bed. This time, the night was quiet. No knocks, no scratching. But I woke up in the middle of the night anyway. I lay there for a moment, listening to the silence before getting up to use the bathroom. Opening my bedroom door, I glanced down the hallway and froze. A gaping hole had been clawed through my front door. Through it, I could see the dimly lit hallway outside. The hole was large enough for a person to crawl through. For a moment, I stood there in shock. Then I turned to retreat back to my room and stopped dead in my tracks. Standing there in the dim light was a gaunt, humanoid figure. It wore tattered, ragged clothing that barely covered its pale, almost translucent skin. Its long, bony fingers ended in sharp claws, and its face was twisted into a grotesque snarl. A gaping mouth filled with sharp teeth stretched wide, and its bald head tilted slightly to the side. I growled as its snout spine curled, its black eyes swimming closer to my face. Predatory eyes locked onto me with terrifying intensity. Before I could react, the creature lunged toward me. I barely managed to jump back into my room. But not before its claws raked across my arm, leaving deep, stinging gashes. Locked in the room, I mentally thanked myself for keeping the old deadbolt on the door. It was the only thing between me and that thing. I stumbled toward the window. My phone trembled in my right hand as I dialed for the police.
911, what's your emergency?
Deafening crash shook the door. The flimsy lock couldn't hold, and with a loud clang it flew across the room. The door slammed against the wall, and the monstrous creature burst in. Damn it, I muttered with a shaky voice. Without thinking, I acted on pure instinct, hurling myself out the window. I crashed straight through the thin, brittle glass, shattering it with my body. The creature lunged, its claws slicing through the air, barely missing me as I fell. I hit the ground hard. The second-story drop wasn't high enough to kill me, but the impact on the grass, littered with shards of broken glass, left me bruised, bleeding, and disoriented. My injured arm throbbed, and my vision blurred from the pain. Still, I forced myself to stand, though my legs felt like jelly. My head spun, and my body threatened to give out. That's when it hit me. I'd left my phone back in the room. I glanced around, desperate for help. The street was empty, eerily quiet in the dead of night. There was no one to turn to. Staggered forward, every step a struggle, when suddenly a sound behind me froze me in place. Something heavy hit the ground. I heard it again. Footsteps, slow but deliberate, crunching on the grass. I turned my head, terrified of what I might see. There it was. The thing was crouched a few meters away, its gaunt frame illuminated faintly by the streetlights. Slowly it stood, its bony figure unnervingly tall and thin. Its head tilted slightly, predatory eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Then it locked its gaze on me. My body shook uncontrollably as I tried to move, to run. I managed a few unsteady steps before collapsing face first onto the ground, my strength completely gone. From where I lay, I turned my head just in time to see the creature start moving toward me. Its long, clawed hands dragged across the ground as it advanced, deliberate and menacing. Suddenly, a loud engine roared in the distance. Headlights flooded the street as a passing truck tore through the night. The bright light startled the creature. It froze, then darted away, disappearing into the shadows behind a building. They arrived quickly, providing first aid and rushing me to the hospital. The aftermath. After a while, a few days later, while lying in my hospital bed, I saw the news. What the police discovered in that cursed apartment made my blood run cold. The bodies of 4 residents were found inside, 2 of whom had been reported missing for weeks. Their remains were horrifying, dried out, partially mummified. Other neighbors admitted that they too had heard strange noises at night. Footsteps echoing through the halls, faint knocking on doors. As I stared at the hospital ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That thing had been hunting people in the building, collecting their bodies like some grotesque trophies. I heard it. Almost imperceptible tapping sound. It was coming from the door to my hospital room. Like and subscribe if you got scared.